In the South Korean capital of Seoul, we've made contact with a young man of 26 years who, until 2 years ago, didn't know that a world existed outside of the barbed wire.
I didn't know, not at all, not until I escaped.
He quite simply thought the whole world was a prison camp. He didn't know that the country North Korea existed, that something exists outside of that country. He didn't even know that the mastermind behind his miserable life was Kim Jong Il. The children from Camp 14 were so worthless that they didn't deserve knowledge of the life and thoughts of the dear leader. Shin is not special in the sense that he has escaped the North Korean prison system. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of prisoners are locked up there, and a few have managed to escape. But he's unique in the sense that he's the only one known to have escaped a so-called special control zone. That's a special camp system within the camp system, where prisoners are expected to spend their whole life. He's the only one who has come out alive and has been able to tell his story. We meet Shin at an old prison. Here the Japanese kept, tortured and murdered Korean patriots before and during the Second World War. It's an environment that he recognizes immediately.
I was in a cell exactly like that.
Shin Dong-hyuk's story began on the 19th of October 1982. His parents were prisoners in Camp Number 14, isolated in the mountains north of the North Korean capital of Pyongyang. The reason why is not known, but as a reward for good behavior, they were selected for marriage and put together in a cell for 5 days. 9 months later, Shin was born behind the fence. One thing followed him every day.
We were always hungry.
The little boy was placed with his mother, but she worked every day in the mountains and mines from 5 in the morning. When she returned around midnight, she had no time for the boy. She often beat him. He learned nothing about common humanity.
I had no real feelings when I was a kid.
Two categories of people inhabited the world behind the wire.
Those who made mistakes were prisoners. Those who made no mistakes were guards.
In the eyes of the little boy, the starved and sometimes beaten woman who returned to him at night was the cause of his suffering.
My mom had made mistakes, so it was only natural that we should live like this. I didn't even want to know why.
At 5 he was sent to school in the mornings. They taught him to read and write, to add and subtract. The teachers were guards with pistols and sticks to beat the little ones. One day he witnessed a teacher beating a little girl on the head so hard that she died the next day. In the afternoon, the 5-year-old was sent to the mountains to do hard labor. The only positive thing about that was that it was possible to catch mice, rats, worms and snakes for the eternally hungry stomachs. Friendship and closeness didn't exist. Everyone was on his own. Everybody else could be an informer.
Our society was constructed in a way so that my mother was supposed to inform on me and I would inform on her.
The day came when Shin was taken from his mother. He was placed in a dormitory and supposed to attend secondary school.
From 12 years on, it was nothing but work. But they called it secondary school. There was no reading or stuff like that.
It would be 2 years before he was to see his mother and an unknown brother again. But before that he was suddenly dragged out from the dormitory by guards, thrown into an isolation cell and subjected to unspeakable torture. His mother and brother had attempted to escape. The idea was to get the 14-year-old boy to reveal if he knew anything about the attempt, but he knew nothing and couldn't tell anything. The torture went on for 7 months. One day, it was the 29th of October 1996, Shin was dragged out to an open square and placed in the first row of the prisoners there. He thought he was about to be executed, but then they brought out his mother and his brother.
I think it is better we skip this part.
The brother was shot. The mother hung. She was tied up and gagged, but just before she died, she looked directly at him. He avoided her eyes. From then on, a miserable life was transformed to daily naked horror.
After the death of my mother, I had an incredible hard time. I was beaten every day. I almost died.
The other children attacked him. "Your life is lost," they yelled and laughed. They stole his food, and all the time he hated his mother and brother for what they had done.
I blame them a lot. It's hard to express. But it was a good thing that they died.
엄마하고 형하고 많이 원망했어요. 어떻게 보면은 엄마하고 형이 죽기 잘했다. 그때는 그렇게 생각했어요.
After all they had committed a crime.
당연히 죽어야지 하는 생각.
Years went by. Shin was teamed up with a guy who had lived outside the wire. He told the boy about Kim Jong Il and his father Kim Il-sung, and about the fact that a world existed out there where there was endless amount of food every day.
The food made me escape. Even if it was going to cost me my life, the only thing that interested me was the food.
One day in January 2005, he was in the mountains with a friend hauling timber. It was twilight and cold. The guards were away for a moment. The electric fence was only 20 meters away. This was the chance of a lifetime.
If we don't run now, we may never get the chance again.
We shall return to Shin's escape, but before that we have another contact to meet. Shin's friend, Kang. Kang has made the drawings for this program based on his own experience and the stories of Shin and other defectors. We meet 23-year-old Kang at a modest private center that collects documentation about North Korean defectors. Kang, is that you? Hi. Are you good to see you? Shin and Kang are small guys. Their bodies themselves document that something is awfully wrong in the north. So these are your drawings?
저희 북한 애들은 보통 다 키가 작거든요.
Children in North Korea are much smaller. Sixth graders in South Korea are more than 170 centimeters in height. In North Korea, they are 150 to 160.
여기 애들은 초등학교 6학년이 거의 키가 막 170 넘는데 저희는 뭐 고등학교 6학년 돼도 뭐 키가 거의 한 160, 뭐 150짜리 다 작죠. 네, 말 엄청 마르고 또.
Their faces are always swollen because of hunger.
Kang hasn't been to the camps, but he knows hunger very well. It arrived in earnest in his small provincial town during the early 90s, where North Korea was grinding to a standstill. There was no economy, no fuel, no work. Worst of all, the state food coupons became worthless. The shelves were empty. The first to die were the old people and small children. The bigger kids and adults were out in the mountains digging for moles, rats, mice, frogs, and even rainworms. The landscape changed from green to brown.
뭐 산은 다 벗어.
The mountains were cleared of anything green. Eventually, they didn't look like mountains, just bare soil.
밭으로 보면 되죠.
The town sank into deep apathy. Many homeless people settled in the ice-cold railway stations, but trains rarely arrived. The orphans, who were too small, withered away and died.
그게 보면 잘 곳이 없으니까요. 그다
People had nowhere to sleep. In Wonton, where I lived, there is a train station which is always open. When people had nowhere else to sleep, that's where they went. Some small children actually lived there.
그래도 기차역은 원래 이렇게 열려져 있잖아요. 그러니까 거기 안에 들어가서 애들이 막 살고 막 그러거든요.
The streets were empty now. Once in a while a car passed. People from the party or the state.
잘 산다는 게 그러니까
The ones in high positions live well. They don't help anybody.
안 도와주죠.
Society had come to a full stop. Only the forces of oppression worked on.
그래가지고 신고를 당하면 바로 진짜.
When somebody squealed to the police, people would suddenly disappear at night. I've heard they ended up in prison camps.
같은 곳을 간다고 하더라고.
But what about all the food that South Korea, Japan and other countries sent?
그런 건 뭐.
I've never seen that or heard about it.
저희는
Like the forces of oppression, propaganda still worked. While little children died before their eyes, people were told that they lived in a paradise and that people in South Korea and elsewhere were much worse off.
I thought that we in North Korea were best off in the whole world.
Kang didn't know better, so when his father, who had been in a camp, decided that the family should escape abroad, he was crestfallen.
안 가게 되죠.
At first I said no, I wanted to protect the fatherland. My father said, "Fatherland? What country is that? What a shit country."
After the interview, Kang's friend Shin comes around. We've decided to go out and have lunch before continuing the talk. There's an abundance of food in South Korea, and that is the only thing that the two friends really appreciate in the South. They feel rootless and helpless in this society that operates under a totally different version of the law of the jungle than they're used to. They were taught total obedience to higher powers. Here they're expected to make their own decisions every hour of the day.
완전 구신 걸로. 자, 그 여기 가서 최신용.
I've got a new cell phone, the newest model.
영상판이야?
아니, 영상.
Time for food. Shin and Kang spent their whole childhood and youth in a state of permanent hunger. Until he escaped 2 years ago, Shin had never tasted meat except raw fish, rats, mice, frogs and the like. No more of that.
delicious.
We need to finish the story of Shin and his escape from the camp. We find a park in the center of Seoul. Shin rewinds the film back to the 2nd of January 2005. That is when he, as the only one ever, escaped North Korea's special control zone.
근데 이렇게 앉으면 안 되나?
Can I sit like this?
이렇게요?
Yes, that's fine. Or does it look a little arrogant?
금방이잖아요.
He and his friends were 20 meters from the fence. Then they ran. Shin went first but stumbled, so that the friend was the first to throw himself at the fence. Shin remembers that there were sparks and a horrible stench, but he climbed over the friend, burnt his legs terribly in the high-voltage fence, and continued to another world. He thought his friend was close behind him and found shelter in an empty shed in the forest, but his friend never turned up. Shin still doesn't know if he died in the fence or later.
지금 생각하면 그게
When I think back, that's the biggest sin I have committed. I still feel guilty.
그래서 가지고 넘어왔어.
But on the 3rd of January, he woke up to a completely different world than the one he knew. It was North Korea, all right, but to him the degree of freedom he found in this prison community impressed him much more than the glittery and modern China and South Korea that he was going to see later on.
너무 사람들이 자유롭게 걸어다니는 거예요.
Here people went around freely.
자유롭게 입고 다니고.
They were wearing nice clothes. I couldn't believe my own eyes. It was a free society.
너무 자유로운 세상이구나.
He joined up with a band of rag merchants, vagabonding the deep frozen land. A few weeks later, he was at the river that separates North Korea from China. Shin crossed the ice. He was out of North Korea. In China and South Korea, there were skyscrapers, TV, radio, computers, cars and cell phones. That didn't impress Shin. It was just something that glittered.
그냥 뭐 느낌이 뭐 중국에서도 뭐 휴대폰을 봤거든요. 휴대폰 보고 뭐 컴퓨터도 보고 해가지고 그냥 아 이거 정말 신기해서 내가 꼭 배워야 되겠다. 이거 좀 해봐야 되겠다는 그런 느낌이 없어요.
I didn't feel anything special when I saw the cell phones and television in China for the first time. I didn't think that I want that. They were just new and exciting things, nothing else. I repeat, my only wish had already come through. I had eaten and I didn't care about anything else. I still feel that way.
다른 거에는 별로 신경은 지금도 마찬가지예요.
Before we say goodbye to Kang and Shin, we're going to meet another victim of Kim Jong Il's regime, the writer Kang Chol-wan. Together with his father, sister and grandmother, Chol-wan was torn out of their home in Pyongyang and carried off to a prison camp in the mountains. In a few days he was reduced from a happy 9-year-old boy to a hungry, filthy little animal in a daily struggle for survival. Is it really possible that this can happen in the year 2008 and is still going on?
It's a fact. Many have experienced it. It can't be denied.
이거는 뭐 부정할 수 없는 사실이라는 것이죠.
One theory about North Korea is that the top leader may live in his own isolated bubble. Maybe nobody dares to tell Kim Jong Il about realities out in the real North Korea.
그 사람은 이제 그 소위 자국민들은 이제 일체 외국의 정보를 못 듣게끔 다 차단을 하고 있죠. 라디오를 못 듣게 하고.
He cuts his own population off from all information, but he himself has got television from all over the world. It's not that he doesn't know what's going on in North Korea. The brutality of his system has just grown and grown to the point where he now fears that everything will collapse and that he will suffer the same fate as Caucescu of Romania. That's why he does everything to stay in power and kill all his opponents.
Kang Chol-Wang is critical towards South Korea's so-called sunshine policy towards the North, a sort of let's all talk nicely to each other policy. He thinks that it may be the actual reason why Kim Jong Il is still in power, that and the food relief from abroad.
Food and money is sent for humanitarian reasons, but humanity doesn't exist in North Korea.
But humanity does exist among common North Korean people. That becomes evident as we say goodbye to Shin and Kang one afternoon in Seoul.
This is to celebrate that we have met. When you return to Denmark, you must never forget him and me. We have been to the Namsan Tower together. That too calls for celebration.
Thank you too.
Don't forget us.